I remember we were going to a festival. It was called Torpedo Town. It was a free festival down near Southampton. A friend of mine said, have you got a tape that I can play in the car? And I just picked this tape up off the floor, and it happened to be the Porcupine Tree demo. I gave it to him. And when we got to the festival, because he was in a different car, I got out of our car and my friend came up and he said, that tape you gave me is fantastic. And I said, I better listen to that because I haven't actually heard it.
This is Season 2 of The Corruption Diaries, a podcast from the Tax Justice Network. I'm Naomi Fowler. In this 4th episode, Richard Allen starts to build a career in the music business. And luckily for him, he eventually hears something that changes the direction of his life.
I remember listening to a track on my bicycle on the way to work after my friend had said, you need to listen to this tape, thinking I could hear this being played in a stadium. And of course, years later it was. I remember the moment that the band actually got to that size. I went to see them at Wembley Arena thinking, wow, what I imagined has actually happened. It was the cleverness of it that I think that appealed to me. At the same time, I could see there was something in it that could be popular on a mainstream level. And the thing that went through my head was, there's no Pink Floyd at the moment. There's a gap in the market for a new band that could fill that sort of fan base.
While Richard was still working in import-export, he was starting to take concrete steps to shift into making music his career.
1991 was a big year. I was managing the Steps, the Irish-American band, which was the first time I'd ever managed a band. I had no idea what I was doing, but I sort of just worked it out as I went along. And at the same time, I had been working with Ivor towards starting a label.
That's Ivor Truman, the man from the previous episode who'd invited Richard to co-edit Freakbeat magazine.
And the first release we put out was that year as well. So it's really the first year that things got serious. We decided that we were going to do a compilation album of all of the material that we couldn't fit on the flexi discs. I realised that we'd never be able to produce enough issues to put out the music that people had given us that we thought was really good. So we decided we'd do a compilation album. I came up with the label name, and it's a play on Vertigo. Vertigo was a very famous 70s rock label. Actually, Black Sabbath were on Vertigo. And I thought, well, Delerium, it's kind of similar. The artist that did the logo for us, Andrew Linsell, misspelt Delirium. And we loved the logo, and we didn't notice it had been misspelt until we used it. So we ended up with Delirium spelt incorrectly. But, you know, that sort of made it different. That was how the label started, and the first release did incredibly well. First one was 91, Psychedelic Sauna. The record, it was a compilation of bands that we liked, that had sent us material, and it did feature 2 bands that went on to be big. Porcupine Tree, it was their first ever vinyl release, and a band called Osric Tentacles, who went on to be very big. They're a band that I saw at free festivals, were incredibly well known because they sold huge quantities of cassettes. They would, play venues all over the country and get hundreds of people turning up. But they were completely unknown by the music press, and they hadn't released anything on vinyl. So I was the first person to do it. I asked the guitarist if I could put a track on a compilation, and he said, fine, go ahead. It's sold 6,000 copies, Psychedelic Sauna. When we were thinking, how are we going to finance this, we went to NatWest Bank in Uxbridge, usual sort of glass and concrete building. Went along with Julie, actually, to go and see the bank manager to see if we could get a business loan, and sat down with him, guy in a suit, showed him the record, and the look on his face was hilarious because he obviously thought we were mad. And he sort of said, well, I don't think this is a sort of thing that we could get involved with. And I said, well, we've already sold 6,000 of them. And he went, oh, well, in that case then. I just thought, no way, I'm not dealing with you. The moment you're beholden to any financial institution, it's all about the bottom line. And the bottom line is what sells the most, and what sells the most isn't the sort of thing we were doing. The two first releases on Delerium were Nick Riff, who was an American guy that sent a tape in that we really liked. The album's called Freak Element. And the other album was Porcupine Tree's first album, On the Sunday of Life. When I rang Steve to say, do you want to put out an album?
That's Stephen Wilson, the first band member and songwriter from Porcupine Tree.
I remember being surprised that nobody else had contacted him, because I know that he'd sent demos around. And in my mind, it was like, you know, I can't believe no one else has contacted him. I'm so lucky. But of course, the music was so weird. It's not in the least surprising that nobody else had contacted him. Steve had put out 2 tapes, a collection of the recordings that Steve had made in his home studio. We'd re-released them on cassette, and we took the best of those and put it together as a double LP. And the title for the album, On the Sunday of Life, came from a list of titles that we came up with, myself and Ivor. I mean, it had ridiculous names on it, like Plastic Ornaments, Unrealistic Attention, Hot Side of the Sun. Stephen Wilson selected the title from the list we sent him. I saw his home studio. It was in his parents' house front room. His dad had made a lot of the equipment, and it was a classic example of home recording. Steve Wilson is a kind of a studio nerd, I would describe him as. That's his forte, really. And I always remember when we first took those recordings that he'd done to Porky's Mastering. Porky's Mastering is a very, very famous mastering studio in Shaftesbury Avenue in London, or was, run by a guy called George Peckham. And when he put these recordings into the board to cut the lacquer for the LP, he said, whoever did this is a genius. All the levels are spot on. That moment sums up Steve's abilities in the studio. And he'd done all this at home, and he'd done it as a parody of 70s rock bands. He and a friend had come up with this imaginary band, Porcupine Tree, and all these imaginary characters, and all the titles are ridiculous. And it's a kind of a parody of a lot of the band albums that came out in the 70s. And what we did really was we took his parody and made it look like a real band.
While Richard was making Porcupine Tree's first album, or LP as they were called at the time, he was still working his day job at Sanderson's, the wallpaper company. Things were changing for British traders because Britain was playing a key role in developing the European single market. And they sent him to a talk run by the British tax authorities, HMRC.
I was at work. My boss came up to me and said, there's going to be a lot of changes in the customs and excise. HMRC are running some courses, if you can go along to it. So booked on a course. It was at Heathrow somewhere in a hotel. To be honest, at the time, I had no idea of the significance of it. So I didn't know that the single market was being created. All I knew was that HMRC was introducing a whole load of new procedures. I remember a thing called triangulation, which I didn't fully understand, which is a VAT procedure.
That's value added tax, or VAT, which is similar to sales tax.
I just sort of absorbed it, and it went to the back of my mind, and I didn't really have any need for it. Little did I realise that my knowledge of VAT would come back to haunt me. Working at Sanderson's was great fun, but it wasn't for me long term. It was very hierarchical. If you spoke out of place, you were looked down upon as a troublemaker. I started talking about barcoding stock in a meeting. At the time, all of the stock in the warehouse wasn't barcoded, and the stock system was never right. And I suggested they should barcode it, and some other guy got uppity about it. Who are you to suggest such a thing? I made the decision that I wanted to work full-time in the music industry. My boss, Sue, offered me a promotion. And I actually said to her, well, unfortunately, I'm thinking of running my own business. I want to run a record label. And she said, oh, fair enough. And I left shortly after that.
You've been listening to the 4th episode of the Corruption Diaries Season 2 with me, Naomi Fowler, produced and sound designed by Leo Schick. In the next episode,
when the band's on stage performing, suddenly all these kids walk on the stage and we're like trying to stop them, and they all had these cans of paraffin and they all start blowing flames all over the stage.
Delerium Records music used in this episode was courtesy of Cherry Red. If you liked a song, see the track listing in the episode notes.